All right, let's talk taxes. The rules are shifting a bit for 2025 and 2026, and you're probably wondering what that actually means for your wallet. Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down right now. Because at the end of the day, that's the big question, right? How is this all going to shake out on your paycheck? Let's dive in. Okay, so let's just get the big headline out of the way right up front. And it's good news. The tax rates themselves, that 10% to 37% range we all know, they are not changing. What is changing are the brackets. Think of them as the income buckets for each rate. They're getting bigger. And that sounds like a small detail, but trust me, it can make a real difference. But before we can really appreciate what's new, we've got to have a super quick refresher on how our tax system works in the first place. It all comes down to this idea of a progressive system. The easiest way to think about it is with buckets. Imagine you have a series of buckets, each with a different tax rate on it. As you earn money, you start filling the first bucket, the one with the lowest rate, just 10%. Once that one's full, your income spills over into the next bucket, and that portion gets taxed at the next rate up. And it just keeps going like that. This is so important. You are not paying your highest tax rate on all your money. No way. You only pay that top rate on the very last dollars that fall into that top bucket. So with that in mind, what's actually changing for 2025 and 2026? Well, the IRS is essentially making those buckets bigger. They're adjusting them for inflation. And this is a really big deal because it helps fight something called bracket creep. That annoying thing where you get a small cost of living raise, but it just bumps you into a higher tax bracket so you don't actually feel any richer. By making the buckets bigger, more of your money stays in the lower taxed buckets. Okay, so let's get crystal clear on this. What's staying the same? The tax rates, 10 to 37%, and the FICA tax rates for Social Security and Medicare. Those are locked in. What's getting bigger? The income levels for each bracket and also a really important number, the standard deduction. Let's zoom in on that standard deduction for a second. This is basically a chunk of your income that you get to subtract right off the top, so you don't pay any tax on it. And as you can see, it's getting a nice little bump. For a single filer, it's going up to $16,100 in 2026. A bigger deduction is always a good thing. It means less of your hard-earned money is taxable from the get-go. Okay, theory is one thing, but numbers on a screen can feel a little abstract. So let's make this super concrete. The best way to see how this all works is to just run the numbers with a real-world example. So let's imagine a person. We'll say they're a single filer, and for the 2025 tax year, after taking their standard deduction, their taxable income is a nice round $100,000. Now, let's figure out their federal income tax. All right, here we go. We pour their income into the first bucket. The first $11,925 gets taxed at that bottom rate, just 10%. That works out to a tax of $1,192.50. Easy peasy. Okay, bucket one is full. Now the income spills into the second bucket. This covers all the money they earned between about $11,900 and $48,475. That chunk of cash is taxed at 12%. So the tax on that portion is $4,385.88. And finally, the rest of their income, everything from that $48,000 mark all the way up to their full $100,000, falls into the 22% bucket. For this last and biggest piece, the tax comes out to $11,335.28. So now we just add it all up. The tax from the 10% bucket, plus the 12% bucket, plus the 22% bucket, and the grand total for our $100,000 earner is $16,913. And you see, they didn't pay 22% on the whole thing, not even close. That is the progressive system doing its thing. And you know what? That example is the perfect way to understand two super important but often really confusing tax terms, the marginal rate and the effective rate. Let's start with the marginal tax rate. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's just the tax rate of the highest bucket your money falls into. So for our friend earning $100,000, their marginal rate was 22%. It's the rate you'd pay on the next dollar you earn. But then there's the effective tax rate. This is your actual rate, your blended average for the whole year. You just take the total tax you paid, that's $16,913, and divide it by your taxable income. And voila, you get 16.9%. See how much lower that is than the 22% marginal rate? That's your true tax burden. All right, so I think we've got a really good handle on income tax brackets now. But when you look at your pay stub, there's more going on, right? So let's quickly touch on a couple of other really common things: FICA taxes and bonuses. First up,
FICA. You see this on every paycheck. It stands for the Federal Insurance Contributions Act. And the really key thing to remember is that this is a totally separate thing from the federal income tax we just spent all that time calculating. This is the money that goes to fund Social Security and Medicare.
And FICA itself is split into two pieces. You've got Social Security, which is 6.2%, but, and this is a big but, it only applies up to a certain amount of income. For 2025, that cap is $176,100. If you earn more than that, you stop paying the Social Security tax for the rest of the year. Then there's Medicare at 1.45%, and that one has no cap. You pay it on every single dollar you earn.
Okay, let's tackle a question I hear all the time. I got a bonus, but it felt like they took a huge chunk out for taxes. What happened? Well, there's a reason for that. The IRS has a special rule for what it calls supplemental wages, like bonuses. Your employer is usually required to withhold a flat 22% for federal taxes right off the top, regardless of what your normal tax bracket is.
But here's the really important part to understand. That 22% is just the withholding. It's like a prepayment on your tax bill. When you actually file your taxes at the end of the year, that bonus money just gets added to your regular income and is taxed using those buckets we talked about. So if withholding 22% was too much, you'll get the difference back in your refund. If it wasn't enough, you might owe a bit. And just so you know, for the really big bonuses, anything over $1 million in a year, that withholding rate jumps all the way up to 37%.
So there you have it. The bottom line is this. The tax rates aren't changing, but the brackets and deductions are getting bigger. And that's a good thing, because it means inflation won't push you into a higher tax bracket quite so easily. It helps protect your purchasing power. So the real question to leave you with is, now that you know how this all works, what are you going to do to plan for the years ahead?